Have you ever looked in the mirror and seen your parents staring back at you? Not just your eyes or your smile, but their anger, their fear, their patterns, the same wounds they carried, now living inside you like an inheritance you never asked for. What if I told you that the thing you fear most, becoming just like them, isn't your destiny? What if the very family history that feels like a curse is actually the place where God wants to meet you? Let me take you on a journey through the lives of 4 people who should have been destroyed by their family stories, but instead became the ones who rewrote them. If you're watching this, chances are you know what it feels like to carry weight that isn't yours. Maybe you grew up watching addiction cycle through your family tree. Maybe you inherited anxiety or rage, or the kind of silence that breaks people slowly. Maybe you've spent your whole life trying not to become your mother, only to catch yourself saying her words. Or trying to be nothing like your father, only to feel his shadow following you into every relationship. This message is for you, the one who feels like their bloodline is a prison, the one who wonders if God even sees the patterns you're trapped in, or if he's given up on families like yours. Let's discover together what happened when 4 people, Rahab, David, Solomon, and Ruth, stood at the edge of their family's legacy and chose to let God write a different ending. Because here's what I'm learning. Generational patterns don't break by accident. They break when someone finally gets desperate enough to invite God into the deepest, darkest parts of their family story. Let's start with Rahab. Picture her for a moment, not as the heroine we celebrate, but as the woman who woke up every single day in Jericho, in a profession that defined her before she could define herself. She was the prostitute. That was her identity, her reputation, maybe even her mother's profession before her. Can you imagine the shame she carried? The way people looked at her, or more painfully, looked through her. She wasn't born into this life because she dreamed of it. She was born into a city condemned by God, into a family without honor, into a cycle that seemed unbreakable. And yet, something in her refused to accept that this was all she would ever be. Then there's David, the man after God's own heart, right? But let's rewind. He was the youngest son, forgotten in the fields while his brothers stood before the prophet. He came from a family where he was invisible, overlooked, dismissed. And even when God chose him, his family legacy didn't disappear. His father's favoritism, his brother's jealousy, the dysfunction that would later explode in his own children, Amnon, Absalom, Tamar. David knew what it felt like to be shaped by family pain long before he ever wore a crown. Ruth lost everything. Her husband died. Her future died with him. But here's what haunts me about her story. She could have returned to her own people, to her old gods, to the familiar patterns of Moab. Instead, she chose to follow Naomi into a foreign land where she would always be the outsider, the Moabitess, the woman from a cursed lineage. She was choosing a God she barely knew over the only life she'd ever understood. That's not faith. That's desperation. That's someone so tired of the old patterns that she was willing to risk everything for something different. And Solomon, born from the most scandalous union in David's story, the son of Bathsheba, the woman whose first husband was murdered so David could have her. Solomon grew up knowing the whispers, the judgment, the shadow of his parents' sin hanging over his birth. He should have been crushed by the weight of that beginning. But something happened in the collision between his inherited pain and God's purpose. Here's what I'm discovering as I look at these 4 lives. None of them pretended their family history didn't matter. Rahab didn't wake up one day and forget she was a prostitute from a condemned city. Ruth didn't stop being from Moab. David's family dysfunction didn't magically disappear when Samuel poured oil on his head. Solomon's origin story didn't change. The patterns were still there. The pain was still real. The shame still whispered. But watch what happens when they bring their broken family stories to God. Rahab hears about this God of Israel, the God who parts seas and topples walls, and something inside her breaks open. She hides the spies. She makes a confession of faith that's so raw, so honest. I know that the Lord has given you this land. She's saying, I know my city is condemned. I know my life is condemned. But what if your God sees something different? She's not asking for her past to be erased. She's asking for a new future to be written. Ruth makes a declaration that still gives me chills. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Do you hear what she's really saying? I'm breaking the pattern. I'm choosing a different path. Where you go, I go. Where you die, I die. She's not just following Naomi. She's following Naomi's God into territory where generational curses go to die. She's stepping out of Moab, not just geographically, but spiritually. She's saying goodbye to the gods of her fathers and hello to the God who sees her future, not just her past. David, overlooked and underestimated, learns something in those fields that his brothers never learned in the palace. God doesn't need perfect families to do his work. He needs surrendered hearts. When Samuel arrives and David's father doesn't even call him in from the fields, God is already whispering, that one, the forgotten one, the one who doesn't fit the family mold, that's my choice. Here's where it gets beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Breaking generational patterns through faith doesn't mean God erases your family history. It means He redeems it. Notice what God does with each of these people. He doesn't hide their origins, He highlights them. Rahab the prostitute becomes Rahab the ancestor of Jesus. Her name is in the genealogy of the Messiah. God could have hidden her profession, glossed over it, pretended it didn't matter. Instead, He puts it right there in the lineage of His Son. Why? Because He's saying, this is what I do with broken beginnings. I don't erase them, I redeem them. Ruth the Moabitess, the woman from the cursed nation, becomes the great-grandmother of David. Her foreign bloodline flows into the line of kings. God doesn't make her Israelite heritage retroactive. He makes her Moabite heritage purposeful. He's saying, I can take the very thing you're ashamed of and weave it into my greatest story. David, the overlooked son, becomes the man after God's own heart. Not because his family dysfunction disappeared, but because he learned to bring his pain to God instead of pretending it didn't exist. His psalms are raw, honest, desperate. He's not performing for God. He's bleeding in front of him. And God says, this kind of honesty, this is what breaks curses. Solomon is born from scandal, but becomes the wisest man who ever lived. God's first words to him aren't, forget where you came from. They're, ask me for anything. God isn't ashamed of Solomon's origin story. He's ready to write a future that transcends it. Can you see what's happening here? The pattern that breaks generational cycles isn't perfection. It's not pretending your family history doesn't hurt. It's not denying the dysfunction or minimizing the pain. The pattern that breaks generational cycles is radical honesty with God about where you came from, combined with radical faith in where He's taking you. Rahab didn't become an ancestor of Jesus by forgetting she was a prostitute. She became an ancestor of Jesus by believing that God's mercy was bigger than her past. Ruth didn't become great-grandmother to a king by denying her Moabite heritage. She became great-grandmother to a king by choosing a different God, a different path, a different future, while fully acknowledging where she came from. David didn't become the standard for worship by having a perfect family. He became the standard for worship by bringing his broken, messy, complicated family pain straight to God's throne and refusing to hide it. This is the shift, the thing that changes everything. Your family history isn't your destiny, but it's also not irrelevant. It's the exact place where God wants to demonstrate his power to redeem, restore, and rewrite. The shame you carry, God wants to transform it into a testimony. The patterns you're terrified of repeating, God wants to interrupt them with his presence. The curse you think defines you, God wants to redefine it as the backdrop for your greatest breakthrough. So here's what I want to leave you with today. If you're in a season where you feel like your family's past is your future, I need you to hear this. You are standing where Rahab stood, where Ruth stood, where David stood. You're standing at a crossroads between repeating the pattern and breaking it. And breaking it doesn't require you to be perfect. It doesn't require you to have it all figured out. It doesn't even require you to fully understand how God is going to do it. It requires one thing: bringing your whole story, the shame, the dysfunction, the inherited pain, the patterns you're terrified of, and laying it at God's feet with radical honesty and radical faith. Rahab said, "I know my city is condemned, but I believe your mercy is bigger." Ruth said, "I know where I'm from, but I'm choosing where I'm going." David said, "I know my family forgot me, but you see me." Solomon learned, "I know how I was born, but you're defining who I become." What would happen if you stopped running from your family story and instead invited God into it? Not to erase it, but to redeem it. Not to pretend it didn't happen, but to transform what it means. The very thing you think disqualifies you might be the exact thing God wants to use to show the world what real redemption looks like. You don't have to become your parents. You don't have to repeat the cycle. You don't have to carry shame that was never yours to carry. Today, right now, you can be the one who breaks the pattern. Not by pretending it doesn't exist, but by believing that God's power to redeem is greater than your family's power to repeat. Your bloodline doesn't define your destiny. Your faith does. And maybe, just maybe, years from now, someone in your family will look back and say, "That's when everything changed. That's when someone finally chose God over the pattern. That's when the curse broke. That's when redemption walked into our family story." Let that someone be you.